See, you want to know what that was? That was what we call a splash. That's because I've always wanted to make a splash. And you have tuned in, rightly or wrongly, to the Swimming Upstream radio show. And I'm Dorothy Wilhelm. In the olden days, I used to actually jump into the water and swim. I don't do that anymore. The reason we call this the Swimming Upstream radio show is that you have the chance to meet people you wouldn't find unless you swim upstream. And have I got someone for you today? We are going to be talking to, ta-da, the Lincoln guy. That's DL Fowler, my friend Larry. And do you want to tell why you're the Lincoln guy?
Well, yes, that's an odd story, because it involves a friend of mine. So it started out that I was telling a story to this friend of mine who was wanting to help me do a better job of promoting myself in my work, and I considered her to be an expert, which she is, by the way. Okay. So anyway, so an author, a very famous author, by the way, Robert Degoni, asked to buy a copy of my book one day after he remembered, and he said this. He said, "Oh, you're the Lincoln guy." Yeah. And I said, "Yeah, I suppose I am." So I was telling that story to Dorothy, our Dorothy here, right here, and she said, "From now on, you are the Lincoln guy." She said, "And I don't want to know. I don't want to see anything about you in the press. I don't want to hear anything about you. I don't even want to see you unless I'm seeing the Lincoln guy." So that's why.
Very few people pay that kind of attention to me, I must tell you. But anyway, it's now you've got 4 books out, haven't you?
4 books, yes, right, yes. Well, the 4th one is coming out, right, yes.
And then we'll get to that a little later. But I particularly wanted to talk to you today because we are in what you'd call turbulent times. And I think Lincoln, what his surroundings, the people around him, the actions he took have a lot to say to us today. And so I hope that you would kind of wade through it with us. And all I want is a little inspiration to, warm my lonely nights. And
okay.
or that failing, let's talk a little about the similarities in his time and ours.
Okay. So to start with, there's a lot of context that we won't get into because right. it would take hours, and we're not going to do that. We have a limited amount of time, so I'm going to try to stick as close as I can to the not so much the highlights as just the essence of it. Okay, and to start with, in most of Lincoln's career, his political career, almost every day of it actually, he had a rival. That was very close at hand. They were both living in Springfield for most of that time. His name was Stephen Douglas. And Stephen Douglas ran against Lincoln in the 1860 presidential election. And Lincoln won. We all know that. And so a question struck me, and I was talking, Dorothy, with you about this. And, the question was, well, what would have happened if the election had gone differently, if Stephen Douglas had won? So that's important to talk about a contrast because we have similar contrasts today and really over the same kinds of issues. If you take off the veneer of slavery, for instance, I'm not trying to trivialize that. What I'm trying to say is that it was just kind of the manifestation of a deeper issue, and that issue was had to do with power and where power comes from. In the South, at that time, most of the states, legally, you could own other people. And in the North, that wasn't so much the case anymore. The Northern people benefited from slavery in the South. Lincoln talked about this in a letter to a good friend of his one time about the fact that the shirt that he was wearing is a product of slavery. And so Lincoln said, "I can't get away from it. So don't tell me that I can't have an opinion on the matter simply because I don't live where slaves exist."
Let me just ask you a question if I can. Do you feel like because I'm still trying to make some sense out of today with yesterday, do you feel like we trivialize or maybe minimalize the issues of slavery and that kind of thing, because it's easy to grab onto. Do we miss some of the important points, is what I'm saying, some of the things we are in our mind while we listen?
Yeah, absolutely. And one example of that is, for instance, it's easy, very easy for people to say, and we do it all the time, well, that was 150 years ago, right? We don't have slaves anymore. And then sometimes you'll have people point out, well, but the North, had their own form of slavery. They had the industrial plants and manufacturing and all of that. And all of that is true, but it begs the question, well, what is it that causes these things to happen, and why do we keep running into the same kinds of troubles that we had back then? And the answer is that it comes down to a couple of questions. One of them is power, and in the contrast between Lincoln and Douglas, Lincoln believed that right makes might. And publicly, Stephen Douglas argued with him and said, no, might makes right. Now, that's a huge difference. And it plays out in many different ways. One of them was slavery. So if we focus on that manifestation of that problem or of that conflict, we miss the point. The point is, is right what makes might, or does might make right? So that was a huge conflict between the two of them. It exists today. That conflict exists today.
Would it be fair to say, one of us could get in big trouble here, but is it fair to say that we are exactly seeing that, for instance, the might makes right school is in office at this time?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Yes. And to take that back to the Civil War a little bit, the period, the 1850s and so forth, the Supreme Court back then was very much pro-slavery. As a matter of fact, it is 1857, the Supreme Court ruled that a person of African descent could never be a citizen. It could never have the rights of citizenship. Wow. And that was a part of the power. Lincoln sent a friend down to South Carolina after he found out that about the dire circumstances at Fort Sumter to take the temperature of the people. And the friend came back and he said, Lincoln, the problem is that down there they believe that slavery, whether they own slaves or not, and most of them did not, they believe that their life depends on slavery existing, that their entire way of life will go away if slavery is ended. And they say, and they have no sense of loyalty to the Union, none whatsoever.
Why was that?
To the state.
Why was that? I mean, you think, I understand the big things, but wouldn't you think there would have been some loyalty or some observance of what had gone on all this time?
Well, no. Okay, yeah, a couple of reasons there were not. Okay, one reason was education. Another reason was propaganda, and a third reason is essentially that people. It's all about today. It's what I have today. I don't want to reach out there and grab something different because I might wind up in a worse position. Those are a couple of things that were in play then. They're in play today. And that also played out kind of in the political rhetoric of the day. Stephen Douglas reinvented the States' Rights Amendment, the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says that anything that's not in the Constitution any power that's not given to the federal government in the Constitution is reserved for the states and the people. It seems like I think a good study of the founding fathers would say that what they meant by that was of the states from the people, not the people individually. Okay. Well, Stephen Douglas took it the other way. He said, no. He said, what it means is that individuals can preempt the laws of the states, so that if I'm coming from South Carolina, with my slaves into Massachusetts, for instance, that abolished slavery by then, if I did that, I wouldn't be ruled by Massachusetts law. I would be ruled by South Carolina law because I'm coming from South Carolina. But Lincoln said, well, what you're really trying to tell me is that the state doesn't matter. What matters is the person. The person has slaves. He bought the slaves under a legal framework, and regardless of the legal framework that he moves to, he can carry that with him. We have a similar idea today, and that is this individualism, and the individualism says that, don't tread on me.
Yeah.
Okay. And yes, all of that is part of our history, but it's not necessarily something that is absolute. We all live in community, and the closer we live together, the more important, the greater importance we put on the community making decisions and everybody who's in the community, following those rules. Again, the same kind of basic problem exists. People want to say that I don't want the government telling me what to do. I don't want the government voting to tax me to do something so that it can do something that I don't approve of. We've lost the concept that the majority rules.
Is there any chance of putting it back?
You would have to get rid of the Electoral College and the United States Senate to do that.
Yeah, but otherwise.
Because both of those are there for the express purpose of giving the minority control, some level of control, protecting the minority interest. But now what it is the minority is basically people who have a lot of power financially and politically. And so they use those two institutions to preserve that status in our country and in our society.
If you were to be elected president tomorrow, which I don't think is too likely, but you never know, what have you learned from Lincoln and Douglas that you would everybody's doing it immediately since they're elected. What needs to be, looking back at the Lincoln-Douglas situation, what needs to happen right away? What would you do? I want you to get the office and get rid of people.
I would probably do the kind of thing that several presidents have done in the past, but it would take, it doesn't happen overnight, which basically is that, and this is I think a thing from Lincoln, is that Lincoln was a great believer in the greater good. I would make the greater good our motto, our test. In other words, what we are about is not what you, the individual, would like to have, but what is good for the greatest number of us. And that's a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow. That's why that's why every time we've tried to go there, we've had some kind of a pushback, a very emotional pushback, and don't tread on me. Well, then, I'll give you an example. I live in a community that has a homeowners association, and homeowners associations are hated more than the federal government, I think. Right. But, we have a rule, and the rule basically has to do with maintenance of yards. And our rule is that the HOA, the board, is responsible for maintaining all of the yards. Well, we have some homeowners here that believe that they have control over their yards. And so things pop up, that aren't in the interest of the entire community. But those people say, I'm sorry, but I'm going to get in the way of the budget financing the maintenance of everybody's yards, because I want mine to be the way I want it, and I want to be the one that makes those decisions. So I'm going to block everybody else from having it. Who does that hurt? Old people like me. I don't want to get out there. I don't want to get out there and garden.
Well, there's so much to think about. I know your fourth book, and by the way, when is that coming out, my dear?
It'll be later this year. I've been distracted somewhat by a project I'll tell you about in a moment, but I've been distracted.
let me just ask about this, and then you can tell me about the project. But your new book, Wisdom for the Ages, the Abraham Lincoln Conversation Card. That sounds really interesting. What are you doing?
Okay, so let's back up a little bit. That is the project I'm going to talk about in a minute. But let's talk about the books first, okay?
Okay.
These 3 books are the books that exist in the current series. And they are all different ways of telling the Lincoln story in different parts. The first one on the left is Lincoln Raw. It's Lincoln telling from his point of view what it was like to be Lincoln growing up.
And that's the one that made you famous, right?
That's the one that made me famous. It's still my bestseller. I think it's because people like the picture.
I think so too. It's a wonderful picture because, the thing about Lincoln, he wasn't good looking. He didn't even look over bright.
Right.
Something about it.
Yeah, there's something about that face. The second book, the one in the middle, is about Lincoln and his valet, William Henry Johnson, and how the household staff influenced Lincoln a lot on race, his evolving views on race and the role of Africans in American society. And the third book is a story that I find very special. It's a story of an Army nurse who went through literal hell during her early years and her adult life. I like to say that it was bookended by watching her father crushed to death by a masthead falling 50 feet onto him on the ship's deck, and life going downhill from there. And it ended with her husband and her daughter and her son all dying on her, and she held their hands and in their final breath, and she went into severe depression. But she recovered, and she came into the Lincoln household in the White House as a nurse, and she was Mary Lincoln's and President Lincoln's spiritual guide to help them heal from the trauma and the grief of losing their son Willie. The next book, if you'll flash it up, this is the one that's coming up, and this is the story of 2 young men. This is actually Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed, and their intimate friendship, and how Lincoln, the emancipator, and Joshua Speed, the slave owner and the son of a wealthy plantation owner, how the 2 of them conspired during the Civil War to save the Union by keeping the state of Kentucky loyal to the Union. And to me, it is a great guidebook for us in today's time when we have these differences of opinion, and how do you come about those different manifestations, okay, different views on that manifestation of slavery, which is all about power. How do you get 2 people from opposite ends of that spectrum of manifestation to come together and fight for for something that they both believed in, which was the greater good?
Well, do you think, what if magically Lincoln were transported, and he's only got 10 minutes because they transported him pretty fast? What would he tell us today? Actually, he only has 5 minutes.
Okay. All right. So Lincoln would tell us exactly the things that he told us in the Gettysburg Address. He would tell us exactly the things he told us in his inaugural addresses. He would tell us the same thing he did in the Cooper's Union speech, which is basically that right makes might, and essentially that everything is in God's hands. He was on a constant search for the will of God, and he finally found it. And he said, we both say God is on our side. We both pray to the same God. We read the same Bible, and we believe that God is on our side. He said, however, one of us must be wrong, and maybe we both are, and that God has some other purpose in mind. So I would remind us of that, because we're far too proud as Americans to be humble enough to satisfy God and to understand his will. And that's what Lincoln would tell us.
Well, now you have written a lot of books with just crammed with practical, inspiring thought. You must have learned something, Larry. What tell us what is the overriding? Give me a quotation from anybody in any of your books that you could follow, that you could live with.
This too shall pass.
Now, I don't find that as encouraging as you might think.
Right. Well, but no, it is, because there's always, it's kind of like what Lincoln basically said, about the will of God. He said, we're going to have to pay a steep price for our sin, but we will come out of it better people.
And did we?
We did. That doesn't mean we don't backslide from time to time. I really honestly think that one of the differences here in this present moment is the fact that Stephen Douglas won the election this time, and he didn't the time before. So we have some new waters to chart here. But the way you chart them is you don't get discouraged, you don't get reactionary, you don't get emotional. You just keep your head down and do your business, and maybe eventually some people are going to come around, but you don't have any control over that.
Well, let me ask you for a parting question. This has been a lot of fun. We'll want you to come back, but of course, what do you know today that you didn't know when you started writing these 4 books, which are available everywhere? Where are they available, my dear?
Everywhere, yes. They especially on my website, yes, but especially on my website.
No, my books are available on his web.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, what have I learned? I think that especially about Lincoln, I've learned that we elect the wrong kind of people almost all the time,
Really?
because Lincoln stands in sharp contrast with most of the politicians that we worship. He was a humble man. He was a learner. That's my favorite thing about Lincoln, by the way. There was nothing he didn't want to learn. I mean, I wish I could go into all the different things that he had done to learn. Just as an example, he was far ahead of his time in terms of technology. He's the only U.S. president to have ever in his lifetime been awarded a patent.
Really?
For an invention. And his invention was very practical. It was a way to keep boats from sinking when there were obstacles in the water. I mean, it was so. That's the number one thing. If we were all just open-minded enough that we would learn from every single moment of our day, and we would seek new ways to learn all the time, we would be more like Lincoln, and we would be in a lot less trouble than we're in.
Well, now that's good to know. The gentleman is DL Fowler, the Lincoln guy, and you can find any or all of his 4 books anywhere. And go to his website. You'll like it, and you can order them from there. What's your website?
DLFowler.com. And can I say one more thing?
You can try.
Okay. Put up on the screen, please, the card deck. This is a new game that I've come out with. You can find it on Kickstarter.com. You can also find it on a link on my website. But Lincoln is the most quoted and misquoted person, I think, in history. And this is a card deck to help us tell the difference between the two.
Oh, good.
It's a game, and it's available only on Kickstarter right now.
How's it selling?
Very well. I want it to sell better, because if it sells better, I can order more in my first batch and sell more.
Funny how that works out.
The deadline is June 2nd, by the way, noon Pacific time on June 2nd. Wow.
Okay. Well, as always, great to have you here. And I think you've raised more questions than you've answered, but that's the way it goes. And so we'll have to look again. DL Fowler, the Lincoln guy. I'm Dorothy Wilhelm, and this has been Swimming Upstream Radio Show, an SOB Radio Network production. And SOB stands for Spunky Old Broads, and all the hosts are women over 50. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did say thank you, didn't I?
You did.
Oh, good. I'm so glad.